Welcome to the Painting of the Week podcast, where we look at some of the most significant paintings throughout history. Introducing your hosts, Phil Grabsky and Laura Bentham.
And welcome to this week's Painting of the Week. I'm here as ever with Laura. Hello, Laura.
Hello, Phil.
And today we are going to talk about a painting called Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. I feel like that a bit sometimes.
What, that we've...
Wandering above the sea of fog.
Yeah.
Or wandering in a sea of fog.
Yeah.
Anyway,
especially at the moment, for sure.
Especially at the moment. Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog by Caspar David Friedrich. And this painting was done around about 1817. And you can find it in two places. You can either go to the Art Gallery of Hamburg, see the real one, or go to our website, seventh-art.com, and click on the podcasts and bring it up. And for those of you, of course, watching this on YouTube, then of course you're already looking at the painting. Let's start a slightly different way today. When you look at this painting, Laura,
Yes.
what would be, because I have to think a lot about musical soundtracks and composition of scores for my films. What would be your musical background to this? You're looking at this painting, let's say this was a film, that's a real man standing on top of that bluff. What's the score?
Okay, well, so I spent possibly about 5 hours with music, because I just completely, for me, it was all about the music.
Great.
I was just like, you have to have the music on this one. So...
Well, let me ask, why did you think that on this one?
Well, that's because of the contemplation.
Okay.
Over that scene. The first thing that happens to me is, and this is why got a bit into this actually, I was thinking, you know when you go to an art gallery and there's never really any music particularly?
Yeah, people mumbling away.
That's always been a thing, isn't it, I'm assuming. But now, everyone's got headphones. So now, people are going to be thinking, actually, I might pop a little bit of music on while I'm looking at this.
Well, some of the audio guides have a bit of music, don't they?
Exactly. But anyway, so I went from Beethoven,
Yeah.
number 6,
Yeah.
Richard Strauss, Alpine Symphony.
Yeah.
Then I went to Mendelssohn, the Hebrides Overture,
Yeah.
Fingal's Cave.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I ended up on one of my all-time favourites, and it really, really is, which was Elgar's Nimrod.
I think that has... Ella, and my daughter would know because she's very good with music. I think that's often Classic FM's number one.
Is it?
You know, they do like the top 300 pieces as voted for by the listener, and I'm pretty sure Nimrod comes in there at number one.
It does for me. It does for me. And then I did a modern piece. I got onto some modern ones.
Okay.
And I really love this band called VNV Nation.
Okay.
Which is, it's sort of soundtrack pieces, synthesizers, and they've got this one record called Collide. It's about 6 minutes, and that one was there as well for me. So that was where, I spent more time on music than I did, I don't know, thinking about things. But what about you, Phil?
Well, no, but I think that's really interesting. I think if somebody listening to this has the time, then put the picture full screen, and just play different types of music against it, and you'll see what we deal with as filmmakers, because it is transformational. I mean, even Beethoven, one of the things, there's a great quote in my In Search of Beethoven film where this guy says the thing about Beethoven is he doesn't, the 9 famous symphonies, each one is different, each one he's creating. And the way he puts it is very good. He says, creates his own sound world.
Mm-hmm. So
you could play a clip from any one of those symphonies against this, and each one would make the picture slightly different.
Yeah.
You've chosen Symphony number 6.
Yeah.
But if you had, the famous 9th.
Exactly. I hummed and hawed
for
ages.
And Because what you then do, and this is why you've got to be careful with music, because of course you're then bringing the emotion of the music onto the painting.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take the Ninth Symphony. If you were to use the Ninth Symphony, and the Ninth Symphony, it's interesting talking about Beethoven. I was going to talk about Beethoven anyway. So Beethoven writes that just after, pretty much contemporaneously with this painting actually, but 1815, the Napoleon is defeated finally at the Battle of Waterloo. This has been a traumatic period for Europe. The first 15, like the previous 15, even 20 years, from the French Revolution through to this moment now, so 3 decades, absolutely traumatic. You're talking hundreds of thousands, perhaps low millions of people have died because of revolutionary fervour, but also because of Napoleon's ambitions. He's finally defeated at the Battle of Waterloo by the British and Prussians. And they have something called the Congress of Vienna in, I believe, 1815. And here's a little known fact. People don't often know that Beethoven actually wrote a 10th symphony.
No, I didn't know that.
In fact, he was planning to write an official 10th, but he also wrote a 10th, which was what's it called? It's like a military symphony. Anyway, Congress of Vienna. The thing about the Congress of Vienna was that they felt optimistic.
Okay.
They thought, finally we've defeated this dictator, we can move forwards. And so the whole thing with the Ninth Symphony is all about humanity coming together, to work together. Finally we can do something great, and look forward to a better future. Now, if you have that music laying over this, you have somebody up there who's thinking, looking to the bright future. Let's assume this is a dawn rather than a dusk, and so it just changes how you see the picture. On the other hand, if you played something slightly maudlin and a bit gloomy, then you start to think, well, who is this guy dressed in black? You don't see him. He's got his back to us. He's walked to this. You also start to think a bit more about the dark, slightly, somber rocks. Then you start to think maybe a little bit about Caspar David Friedrich's past, and the fact that before he was 20 his mother died and his 2 sisters died and his brother died, and maybe this is him contemplating mortality. And
all the same period though.
You have a somber music across it, or you have anyway. So music can play a huge role in how we interpret, and that's why, when going back to making films, you've got to be so careful, because the painter, generally speaking, knows that his painting or her painting is going to be seen in silence.
Yeah. Okay.
So when we lay music on top of it, we're kind of affecting in a way how that painting's been interpreted.
I always want to put music on top of things.
Yeah.
So now I'm thinking that when I go, I'm not a big headphone person, to be fair, but now I'm thinking, if I was standing in front of that painting in the flesh, because it will be so different in the flesh than what it is on the screen, I really, really would like to have a piece.
It'd be a really good audio tour to do of a gallery where there's they choose 10, 20 paintings, and all you're doing is standing in front of them and they change the soundtrack.
Yeah. They did that once. I went to the V&A, and I mean, this is completely off topic, when I went to the David Bowie exhibition. Did you go to that?
No.
It was really, really good. And that changed and played, and that was really, really good. But for obvious reasons. But yeah. But this is such a wonderful piece, and I didn't think I would like it immediately, and I didn't think I'd find it interesting. But because I got so caught up with the music and the fact that he's just, like you just said then, and all the things that are going on, I just thought maybe most of it was to do with the fact he was looking out, to do with, he had just, I believe, got married. So he'd had such a...
Are you about to jump?
Well, there we go. We wanted to finish now.
What I meant to say was he's celebrating
such a wonderful experience.
the joy that he's feeling.
Well, no, because he had such a traumatic childhood, and that with his brother dying, sort of, he watched his brother die. There's a couple of different stories of how it happened, but they believed that. I mean, that would never leave you, would it? So him getting married, sort of must be thinking to himself, oh, okay, new beginnings, moving forward. I've got to get over all those mountains to get to the other side.
I mean, there is a discussion, isn't there, about who that person is. I mean, I have seen a couple of self-portraits, and I think he's got kind of reddish hair in the self-portraits, isn't he? So, I mean, it could be him.
Yeah.
It could be a form of self-portrait. He just says wanderer above the sea of fog. I mean, let's talk about what we can see before we talk about what we know about the period and the style of painting and all the rest of it. So, when you start to look at... I mean, it is possible to see something like this and think it's a bit like a birthday card,
Yeah, not a lot to it.
Or I miss you, I can't wait to get home, I don't know. But when you start to look at it, it's actually... I mean, this is aided by the fact that I've looked at other works by Caspar David Friedrich, and his landscapes, I think, are pretty tremendous.
Yes.
In Berlin, on the what's known as Museum Island, which is in what was East Berlin, and quite near the Brandenburger Tor. Anyway, they've got the beautiful gallery, the old Alta Gallery. They have a section on, mentioning it now, the Romantic period.
Right.
And quite a lot of it, maybe even the most represented, is Caspar David Friedrich. And his landscapes are they are almost kind of magical Lord of the Rings type landscapes. And
they're stunning.
And often there are kind of silhouetted characters. I think you mentioned before we started that he never did, apart from some self-portraits, he rarely did. Yeah,
he rarely did people. He did one of his wife, which is where she's looking out of the window. I'm having to turn my notes over. Woman at the window.
But again, that looking
which was I like that.
And women looking out of windows, or anyone looking out the window, it's symbolic of looking to a future, looking to a slightly different...
It's quite a key piece, isn't it? I mean, you think of, you're doing Hopper. Loads of his are looking out windows.
Yeah, looking out windows is always it's never an accident. People don't...
And then with the Magritte last week, or whenever it was.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about that, because that was like, you don't know what was in front of that painting, out of that window, and then it could be, we were saying about the face with the apple. So it's like it's like a surrealist then, because we don't know what his face has got on in front of him, sort of looking out. We don't know. It's just a bit early.
It'd be funny if you turn around. One big apple.
I know, but it could be.
But what I see when I see this picture is I admire the technique. But actually what strikes me is the care with which, we've talked about this in other podcasts, these lines are not by accident. So you think, obviously you've got the rocks, they're in a pyramid.
Yeah.
So whether you start from the left, which is more normal, or you go from the right, bang, they're going up to him. His left leg and his walking stick create another pyramid, another triangle, which takes you further up. His body, his coat, the bottom half of his coat is also forming another triangle. Even the fact that one of his arms is sticking out means that the upper part of his body is almost another triangle. So basically everything leads to his head, you'd think. But then, if you carry on looking, so equal to his midriff almost, you have these rocks sticking out. So they're kind of, you read across the rocks one way, the other side slightly more distant, slightly tilting down back to, so everything's kind of leading again to him. But in particular, and clearly I'm certain it's fake, I'm certain he's created this in a studio, But if you look at the kind of, what I'd say is the mid-distance or the near-far distance, those two lines coming down, they are coming straight to... Oh, I've just lost the picture. It's not helping.
Oh, seventh. There we are. But yeah.
But they're coming straight to his heart, or his that area, his chest. And in the distance, you've got another little pyramid, haven't you? Which again is you go up the pyramid of rock, you come down the other side to his head, and I think that little block on the right hand side kind of just almost looks like something out of the American Arizona desert. I think that's just a block so you don't look out of the frame. So everything's pretty much, it's like these like spokes of a wheel.
Yeah.
All around his chest, or perhaps you could even take it a step further and say his heart.
Yeah, because those two coming out of from where his arms are, sort of thing, they're a sort of mirror image of each other. They actually don't look. I'm not sure they look. I don't know. Now I've looked at it now. Here we go again. I don't know whether they look right to me now, compared to the other bits. Not that I'm going to question his painting, because I think it's wonderful, but it doesn't look. They're so identical, aren't they? Those two sort of grey.
Yeah, no, they are.
Whatever they are in the distance.
No, that's what I'm saying. They're just they're in the studio, and they have one element, one point to them, which is to point to his chest.
Right.
And I think you don't necessarily point at someone at the chest. Basically, I think it's pointing to his heart. So, I think he's making a point. And I think then of course what you start to do with paintings is you start to perhaps overanalyze them, or you're incorrectly analysing them. But I don't think he's maudlin or depressed, or I think he's and I think this is part of the Romantic period. I think he's celebrating landscape, nature, the natural world,
your own mortality, insignificance. Everything on that painting. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say, obviously, how he's feeling.
And the fact that I think the fact it's a silhouette is intentional, because you're not interested in, it doesn't, it is a person reflecting on what I think it would be pretty safe to say, what he can see. Yes. If he's looking at us, then it's also, well, what's his face telling us, and what's, it's all about him, and the landscape's just a backdrop. No. We are that person. When you get to the top of anything, though, like mountains or hills, and you have got a gorgeous view, do you always stop? Yes. Yeah. You always stop. Yeah. You always take a look. You always contemplate nature. Oh, I don't know how it's... I wonder if there are any other mammals, animals, whatever, actually admire the view. Yeah. Or whether we're unique in that. A lion. Would it be admiring the view, or was it just looking for... I don't know now. Food? I think you're right. It's hard. I mean, it's hard to... We need to speak to David Attenborough. I mean, I don't think... We need David. He must know. There has to be... But do you think, if a chimp goes to the top of a tree in a jungle, is he looking out going, that's a lovely view? Or is he thinking, where's my next lunch coming from? So we're unique in that, aren't we? Are we actually unique with the painting then, because a chimp? Do chimps go and get some... They talk about charcoal and do some drawings? I think we are unique. I mean, to talk about chimps, creating art, but I mean, it's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? All right. But no, definitely. Eagles aren't flying around admiring a view, are they? No. They're literally looking for food. So he is asking us to reflect on, we are that individual looking out over that landscape and reflecting. And again, bear in mind, 1817, Europe has been traumatised. Yeah. As I say, I would suspect millions of people have died. And this is somebody that's come through it. We know a little bit about his biography. He's personally, as an artist, as an individual, come through trauma. and he still seems young and strong enough that he's got a future ahead of him, this particular person. It's obviously, that's probably a 2-3 hour trek to get there.
Yeah, look at his clothes, Phil. I mean, look what we would be wearing if we were doing that.
Yeah, he looks pretty well dressed, actually, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Comparatively. But then, wander above a sea of fog. So, I mean, if that was the title of a poem, you'd know that that's somebody searching for answers in the miasma of difficulties and obstacles that we all face on a daily basis. So I think there's also that being reflected.
I was saying to you, wasn't I, that Turner was about the same time as him, and there is some similarities in some of their paintings.
Yeah, definitely. Because
of the, didn't really know much about Turner, but I looked at some of his paintings and they're wonderful. Especially the seascapes with all the ships and things like that. So, it definitely. I wonder if they ever met. I always ask this because I know that there's so many people out there that listen, and I think to themselves, "Oh, I'm sure they'll know. I'm sure they'll know if they did, or they even quite liked each other's work."
I think it's almost impossible.
You think so?
And highly unlikely, I don't know, but highly unlikely they would have even seen each other's paintings.
Yeah, I suppose that time, yeah.
I mean, you had to, and we see this with the Impressionists, a few decades later, when Manet wanted to see the works of the Spanish artists that he'd heard about, he had to go to the Prado in Madrid. That's the only way you would see the Velázquez or the Goyas or... and you're at the start then of painting starting to travel and exhibitions and so forth, and there's a famous exhibition in the Louvre of Spanish works, and all these artists kind of flock to it. But at this point, not so much.
No. Okay.
So, in terms of the more kind of broader scene that Friedrich is representing, it's what we call Romanticism. And they did absolutely kind of idealize nature.
Okay.
And it's said that they were kind of suspicious of science and industrialization. The world is changing very quickly at this point, and I think you have to be quite lucky to be benefiting from it, frankly.
Yeah.
You go to Manchester now, and there's some wonderful hotels that you stay in. I mean, there's a hotel we stay in, which is an old mill. It's a fantastic hotel, but if you just stop for 30 seconds and think, oh my God, to have worked here.
Work there, yeah.
What a nightmare. I mean, it's like the poor people working in these types of mills today in somewhere like Bangladesh.
Imagine if they saw that now as a hotel.
Yeah.
Nothing romantic about that for them. No way.
And so, literature, poetry, painting, music. Now, when I did the 4 In Search Of films, I didn't do them in this order, but it turned out that the 4 composers that I focused on basically cover what is actually properly known as classical music. We talk about classical music and often being more broad, but actually the classical music period is from Haydn, because he comes out of the Baroque, and you go into the classical with him, and you come out of... So Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, that's the chronological order. And when you come out of Chopin, you're leaving classical music and going into Romantic music.
Okay.
The Romantic period. Now, what is the transition through those 4 pieces of music? Well, Haydn wore the livery, he was a servant, and he wore the livery, the costume, if you like, of the Esterházy princes that he worked for. He had a long life. He actually ultimately worked for 4 of them. And basically on a Monday morning, he'd be called into the office and they'd say, need a symphony on Saturday. We've got, Laura and her husband are coming over. Write us a symphony. Yes, sir. And Haydn would go off. He had a relatively small orchestra and he'd write a piece. Understanding this is quite interesting, because then he had a relatively small orchestra, and to keep them happy, he'd sometimes give them like solo works. So there's a very famous horn concerto by Haydn, which is still played to this day. It's beautiful. He wrote it to keep his horn player happy.
Okay. I love that.
So, employee, Mozart.
Mm-hmm.
Mozart comes along, arguably, ultimately, the greatest composer of all time. Discuss. But he too is an employee of the Archbishop in Salzburg, and then the court. He too had to wear a livery, and he hated it.
Right.
And he got very upset because they went on tour, they journeyed somewhere, and he was told that he'd be sitting downstairs with the cooks eating, and he said, "I'm not having that. I'm as good as any of the rest of you." And he got kicked out. Literally got kicked out on his arse. And then he basically started an independent career as a composer. Now, Mozart dies in 1791, 1792. Beethoven arrives in Vienna, and he's born in Bonn. He has managed to persuade his prince, that also controls him, to let him go to Vienna to study. As it happens, he's very naughty, doesn't do what he's supposed to do, but Napoleon's troops have arrived in Bonn. That prince has fled because the prince has told Beethoven, "You're not doing what you're supposed to do."
Right. Haydn,
who he's gone to learn from, has written to the prince saying he's not doing his work. He pretends to, anyway. He tells me he's got no money, and then so the prince has said, "You've got to come back to Bonn." Right. Beethoven then, had he left Vienna, we might not have heard of him. But just at that moment, Napoleon's armies are arriving. Prince flees. Beethoven thinks, "Great, I'll stay in Vienna." He stays in Vienna pretty much as an independent musician. If the court called, and they would call, and they say, "Come up, there's a pope, there's a bishop coming through, you need to give him a piano lesson." Well, Beethoven would have to do it. But pretty much he was an independent musician. But he's still writing grand works.
Right, yeah.
I'm rattling through this a bit. All the films, of course, are available at 7th-art.com.
This is really interesting, Phil.
But not entirely relevant. But it is relevant. Because then you get to Chopin.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Chopin, who has been absolutely enthralled. He's born in Warsaw. Or in Poland. He's enthralled by what he hears from these other musicians. He makes his way ultimately to Vienna. He only writes in his entire life, I think, 6 orchestral works. What he wants to do is to play the piano and write very intimate, romantic, we call them romantic works. And what he's doing is he's expressing himself. In a way that Haydn would never claim to be expressing his personal emotions, because they are to some extent. But Chopin, if I remember correctly, he only did 30 performances to an audience in his entire life, and some of those were in England and Scotland at the end when he had to do it for money. So it becomes more introverted. It becomes much more a statement of Ronald Brautigam, one of the best pianists in the world. I remember him saying in the film, I struggle to play Chopin because it's so personal.
Right.
It's almost like the only person that can play this kind of personal music is Chopin himself.
I mean, that's interesting.
So all this is happening
at
the same time as people are starting to paint like this. These are not grandiose historical paintings.
No.
They're not, no longer are we getting Napoleon crossing the Alps on his steed, even though he crossed on a mule. We move now to the individual.
Yeah.
And the individual's thinking about himself, in this case it's a him, considering nature, and it's a development in art, and this artist is kind of at the peak of that, isn't he?
Well, the thinking paintings. He's wanting us to think.
Yeah.
But no one, you're right about the Chopin, and no one can think, with absolutely no idea what is going through his head at all.
In fact, I wonder how often before this you've had paintings where the character has their back to you. You don't even see their face.
I don't know.
It's irrelevant.
Yeah. And yet all it's done is made loads of questions for us.
Yeah.
And we've got no answers.
Well, on that.
Yeah. on that, yeah.
Back to the library.
Back to real life.
So, I would say that all these films, as I've been talking about, are available. We've got films about artists from this period. Go to 7th-art.com to have a look. And we'll be back soon. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the Painting of the Week, then, as I'm sure you know, there are 2 previous seasons of 20 episodes each you might want to have a listen to and find some of those artists that you know and love, and maybe check out some artists you might not know so well. And please, if you do enjoy the podcast, it's super if you can share the link, let others know, write us a nice review. All these things kind of help, and it's nice for us to know that there are people out there enjoying what we do as much as we enjoy doing it. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Painting of the Week podcast. For more information, please visit our website at 7th-art.com or contact us by emailing info@7th-art.com. See you next time.